Today, we're so excited to have Dr. Behrooz Sabet, and his topic will be what a world civilization looks like from a Baha'i perspective. Dr. Behrooz Sabet holds a doctorate from the State University of New York at Buffalo. He has been a university professor, academic dean, and consultant on aspects of education and culture. For more than 20 years, Dr. Sabet has been intellectually engaged in research and writing on the intersection of religion, science, and culture. He's a well-known scholar of religion, contemporary intellectual thoughts and movements, and the conceptual and historical origins of modernity and its impact on the Middle Eastern societies. He has translated and written extensively on religious, ethical, educational, philosophical, and social themes, and presented research papers at national and international conferences. He also established the Burhan Institute, a nonprofit organization formed to pursue interdisciplinary research, educational activities, and social discourse on advancing ideas for peace and prosperity in the Middle East. 2 volumes of his edited works in Arabic and English are published. Dr. Sabet has given more than 300 media presentations and interviews on human rights, education, women's rights, religious freedom, modernity, social and cultural change, and globalization. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Sabet.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Barhami, for your generous introduction. It is indeed a blessing to be here and speak about the teachings of Baha'u'llah. The topic of my presentation is the concept of civilization from a Baha'i perspective. And I have prepared a PowerPoint, and I'll go through this, and hopefully at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, we can have productive consultation, and I hope I will be able to answer your questions and discuss your comments. So, as I said, the topic of today's discussion is Baha'i perspective on world civilization. But in the beginning, just let me say a few words about the Baha'i faith in general. The Baha'i faith is a new world religion that came into existence in 1844 in Persia, or today's Iran. The prophet founder of the Baha'i faith was Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. Baha'u'llah taught humanity that there is only one God, and God has sent successive revelations to humanity to guide humanity towards higher stages of moral and spiritual and social perfection. As a result of these successive revelations, we can only say that all religions of God, Baha'i faith, Christianity, Islam, and other world religions have similar origins because they have been sent by one God, and they have also had one universal purpose, and that was education of the children of men. So in that sense, we can say Baha'is believe in one God, one religion, and one humanity. So with that introduction, I would like to start my PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, next slide, please. This is a the one before this slide. Thank you. Okay, here is an introduction to this concept. In 2 slides, I introduce the concept, what we are going to discuss in this program, in this presentation. First of all, the term civilization and its implication for shaping the planet's future are contentiously debated, not only in academic circles, but also in geopolitical and global discourses. We have limited time today. Otherwise, I could have given you more specific examples of these discourses. The whole spectrum of debate involves paradoxical assertion from the clash of civilization to dialogue among civilization. In this context, an examination of Baha'i view of civilization seems to be a timely response to a critical issue of our time. Now, Baha'i teachings discuss faith and reason as the two pillars of any civilization, and these two are discussed in the context of an ever-advancing civilization. In fact, in the devotional section, you also heard this passage from the Baha'i writings. So Baha'i writings refer to civilization as first an organic process that encompasses both the material and spiritual progress of humanity. Second, civilization is a historical process or the result of a historical progress. That means the civilization it comes into existence and reveals its manifestations and gradually declines in the course of human history. So in that sense, we need to have a historical perspective in order to understand the rise and falls of civilizations. The next item is that causes, symptoms, prognosis, and recovery of today's human problems may be explained by various layers of material, psychological, social, and moral conditions of global civilization in its totality. That is, the complexity of human problems in today's global environment are at once material, psychological, socio-political, economic, and moral. And therefore, all of them need to be considered in the context of a broad entity that we call it global civilization or world civilization. In other words, none of these issues or none of these routes, let's say the material or the social or the moral, is sufficient to address the issues and challenges of our time. We need to consider all these factors together under one universal and unifying framework. And that framework can only be suggested or proposed under the umbrella of a civilization. In other words, nation states cannot do that. Races, ethnic groups, no other social entity in the world can achieve this universal goal, but the totality of a world civilization. And then there are also, even though civilization is approved and praised in the Baha'i writings, there are references that civilization, if carried to excess, it tends to cause social breakdown and crisis. And finally, the dynamics of civilization are based on the dialectic of integration and fragmentation. That is, the tension between processes of integration and fragmentation are the generating impulse of history throughout the history of humankind. Thank you. Next one, please. Here are few passages from the writings with regard to what we just discussed. First, material civilization is like unto the lamp, while spiritual civilization is the light in that lamp. If the material and spiritual civilization become united, then we will have the light and the lamp together, and the outcome will be perfect. The next statement is that all men, all human beings, have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. In other words, every human being from any culture, any religious background, any nationality throughout history have been a part of this great drama of history. And the third passage is this: the civilization, so often wanted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences, will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. Thus warneth you he who is the all-knowing, if carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it had been of goodness, when kept within the restraints of moderation. Meditate on this, O people, and be not of them that wander distraught in the wilderness of error. The day is approaching when its flame will devour the cities, when the tongue of grandeur will proclaim, the kingdom is God's, the Almighty, the All-Praised. Next one, please. Okay, then I thought the best thing we can do is, before we discuss Baha'i characteristics of a world civilization, to give you a nice and short synopsis of the definition of civilization and how civilization can be defined in social processes. So essentially, from a political, sociopolitical, or sociological perspective, the social system, any social system, begins with the individual. Individual is the foundation of any social system, is the fundamental unit of social change. So this is also, this also corresponds to the Baha'i perspective that change begins with the individual. Whether, therefore, any kind of social action requires a change in human minds and hearts. Individual. And then the individual, when individual is transformed, the transformation will be extended to the society, to the collective. So it all begins with the individual. Next, we have social interactions, because when we have two or more individuals, obviously we are talking about interactions, because when two individuals or more get together, they have no other choice but to interact with each other. That is the necessity of social existence. And through that, of course, the exchange system begins, which was the foundation of economic activities and everything. We are essentially social beings, and we are not an independent or isolated island. We are destined to live together, and without that social interaction, life cannot continue. So because we are social creatures, any social phenomena is the result of meaningful interaction between two or more individuals. So that's the next step. After we discuss interactions as the foundation of social processes, then we realize that different individuals with different interests and persuasion can come together and establish a group of interacting individuals that find solidarity and cohesion on certain goals and objectives. They form social institutions. In other words, the group becomes legal, becomes formal, and it's called an institution. And the examples of social institutions are education, family, economic life. These are examples of social institutions. So then we go to the next step, which is after, higher step, above the institution, is the society. A society is a larger community. So it becomes larger. For example, communities around the nation constitute American society. So American society is comprised of various communities with different goals and objectives around the nation. So a society is a complex social order that has a higher capacity for unity in diversity. So that is the society. Then we go to the next stage, which is culture. A culture, one of the best ways I found to explain a culture is to say it's the spirit of the society. If the society is about interacting individuals and about their behaviors and material manifestations of those interactions, there is also something above that, something higher than just simple behaviors or simple interactions for food or other necessities of life. All those categories of higher attention or significance belong to the category of culture. There is a German word for it, which explains exactly the same thing. The spirit of the age, Zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, or the spirit of the time. This is the culture. Every society has a culture, as reflecting the spirit of certain time and space boundaries. Culture is about the totality of ideals, meanings, values, and beliefs. You see, none of these values, beliefs, meanings, ideals can be observed. They are not observable. They belong to the category of subjective relationship. They are not like chair and table and computer and food and all that. It's about something higher. And for example, a culture that defines its values in terms of material possession, for instance, if a culture says that material possession is the highest degree of social progress, we call that culture materialistic culture. So this culture then, so the culture impresses itself or imposes itself on all compartments and institutions of the society and makes them also materialistic or fundamentalist or authoritarian. This is the ideals and meanings of the culture that would determine how different social institutions work. Next, please. So after the culture, we reach to the level of civilization. A civilization is a vast cultural entity. It's not just one culture. It brings various cultures together. It's about the geographical as well as material boundaries in which a culture is emerged and externalized. For example, we have Western civilization, but under Western civilization, we have various societies. For instance, various countries, various societies in Europe and the United States and Canada and perhaps Australia, they all belong to Western civilization. And they share common culture or set of meanings and values. So that is civilization. Now, throughout history, according to historical research, not just assumptions, different civilizations have grown in different parts of the world. Now, we are witnessing the development or the emergence of something that we can call world civilization, which represents the consummation of various civilizations into a unified whole. And so this is basically the process. So the next statement is from the Baha'i writing that says, development of human society from primitive life to a global civilization points toward a progressive direction, increased complexity, and higher levels of social organization. All cultures and civilization have contributed to the emergence of an ever-advancing world civilization. So this world civilization that we are going to talk about, which is the Baha'i perspective, is about coming together of various world civilizations. Next item, please. Now, here we discuss general characteristics of civilization. And again, at this level, it's about general definition, not specifically Baha'i. First of all, civilizations are about, have elements of or components of movement as change as essential features of their function. In other words, we don't have a static civilization. Civilizations by nature must be dynamic. If they become static, then they decline. Then the process of stagnation starts. Next is values and meanings comprise the nucleus, the central core, or the unity, the inner unity of civilization. In other words, civilization is like the nucleus of an atomic particle, has a nucleus, has a central core. And that central core is about meanings and values and ideals. And that central core basically directs and extends itself to other layers of civilization. Another factor, which is, again, it's almost a scientific factor or sociological factor, that life and vitality of civilization depend upon reciprocal interdependence of its diverse components organized around the nucleus of civilization. Exactly like an atomic, again, particle. There must be a central core, and then all the particles revolving around it must have cohesion and interdependence. And the next component is that decline and disintegration of civilization begins with the deterioration of its central core, that is, values and meanings, and the extension of that deterioration to the behavioral and material layers of civilization. So if the core is about values and meanings, the next layer is behavior, social interactions and behaviors, and the next layer is the material manifestation of civilization, like technology. So we have the core, we have the society, and then we have the material progress. But history shows that civilizations decline when the central core, that is, values and meanings, are disintegrating. When, in a simpler language, when the morals and ethical foundation of civilization have declined, like the Roman civilization and any other civilization. And this is almost universal among historians, that the backbone, the central core of civilization, which is values and meanings, need to be preserved in order for the civilization to continue as a living entity. Next one, please. Following that, civilization is similar to a living organism, animated by ethical and transcendental values. That is, transcendental values means basically giving human beings a higher purpose in life, something more than material existence. It's a simple explanation. Civilization move and change in the context of, as I said, creative tension between setbacks and progress, between disintegration and integration. Civilization is an evolving, self-organizing, complex, interrelated, and interdependent system. It is evolving, it is self-organizing because it has its own core. It's an independent entity. It's complex, all the components are interrelated. The next element is that civilization is greater than the sum of its parts. Civilization covers material progress, social progress, scientific progress. All of these are elements of civilization, but none of those can be said as the totality of civilization. Civilization is always something higher than the sum of its parts, and that's why we call it's a living organism. And finally, definition of civilization is inherently interdisciplinary and requires references to political economy, to religion, to ethics, to arts and sciences, to psychology and history, and other human sciences. Because we need to look at civilization in order to understand it from all these various angles and perspectives. Next one, please. Okay, now we go to features and characteristics of Baha'i civilization. With that background, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, in the Kitab Aqdas, which is the most holy book of the Baha'i Faith, and also in tablets and letters to the kings and rulers of his time, and Abdul Baha, his successor and interpreter of his writings, which he wrote a book called The Secret of Divine Civilization. And he also gave lectures in the West, in America, in Europe, in the United States and Canada, that he announced certain principles for the world civilization that are in tune with modernity, social progress, liberty, and equality, in a very general nutshell. Now, in a general summarized context, Baha'i concept of future or emerging civilization identifies two goals, two broad goals. Number one, spiritual and ethical transformation of the human race. Number two, renewal of society and its socio-political order. So this means, these two goals, means world civilization is first and foremost a cultural and moral entity based on the first one. And second, in its social manifestation, a legal and geopolitical entity. I'll explain this further in the next or future, in a few slides. Next one, please. Now, because I mentioned as the second goal, renewal of the society in terms of politics, economics, the whole political economy, a spectrum of political economy, I thought this is maybe not relevant to the topic, but this is an important addition that we have to mention before moving forward. That Baha'is believe in separation of church and state, non-involvement in partisan politics, and moral and spiritual transformation of human society through good deeds and education. So this is our method for working and moving towards this world civilization. And here the next is from the Baha'i writings. It says, indeed, the civilization that beckons humanity will not be attained through the efforts of the Baha'i community alone. In other words, all these goals and objectives that we discuss, we should not give the impression that Baha'i community or Baha'is are responsible for all those changes. Numerous groups and organizations animated by the spirit of world solidarity that is an indirect manifestation of Baha'u'llah's conception of the principle of the oneness of humankind will contribute to the civilization destined to emerge out of the welter and chaos of present-day society. So this is our perspective about how this world civilization will be achieved. It's a universal, collective action on the part of the human society. All the nations, all the races, all religions are having a share and some degree of participation and contribution to this process, whether it is known or unknown. It is the spirit of the age, and it is like the sun covering everything. Next one, please. Okay, now we go back to features and characteristics of Baha'i civilization. The first one is central teaching of Baha'u'llah is that oneness of humankind and respect for fundamental human rights and association and accord with all peoples and nations supersede ideological and theological and perhaps racial and national differences. So the oneness of humankind is like the skeleton, like the backbone of Baha'i teachings. Baha'is are instructed to live in peace and harmony with followers of all religions. In other words, this oneness of humankind is really at the core of this world civilization. And Baha'is are advised to follow this principle as a part of that education process that I mentioned. If we are working for a world civilization, we need to advance the concept of oneness of humankind. Here is one passage from Baha'u'llah. Consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. Whatsoever hath led to the children of men to shun one another and hath caused dissensions and divisions amongst them, hath through the revelation of these words been nullified and abolished. In other words, Baha'is believe that with the revelation of Baha'u'llah, the latest manifestation of God, the most significant guidance that God has provided us is that all these differences must be abolished. We are all children of men, and all these differences, religious, racial, national, all these are superficial, and we need the prejudices caused by these divisions and separations are the root cause of world problems. We believe that a culture of peace is one of the foundation of Baha'i world civilization. Baha'u'llah says, ye have been forbidden in the book of God to engage in contention and conflict, to strike another, or to commit similar acts whereby hearts and souls may be saddened. Just imagine, he's not saying that maybe people be hurt or injured. It's just saddening people is forbidden. Next one, please. There are other teachings of Baha'u'llah that, in my judgment, have direct impact on the formation of this global civilization. Some of them may not be directly relevant, let's say American culture, but they are relevant to other cultures. For instance, abolition of holy war. Baha'u'llah says, know that we have annulled the rule of the sword as an aid to our cause and substituted for it the power born of the utterance of men. So the holy war, which is still, a source of conflict and contention in many societies and cultures, Baha'u'llah significantly and decidedly and decisively abolished that. He also abolished the concept of uncleanliness. He says God hath likewise, as a bounty from his presence, abolished the concept of uncleanness, whereby diverse things and people have been held to be impure. He of a certainty is the ever forgiving, the most generous. Verily all created things were immersed in the sea of purification when on that first day of Rizwan. First day of Rizwan refers to the time that Baha'u'llah publicly announced his prophethood in the garden of Rizwan. It was a garden outside of the city of Baghdad. At that time, he was an exile. So what is the significance of this is that the future world civilization will not consider any person unclean. Unclean, not necessarily physical. We are talking about the use of uncleanness in terms of separating people based on spiritual status, based on material status, based on different factors. And all these guilt-ridden prejudices of the past are purified in the sea of God's purification. I thought this symbolic reference has profound impact on the way that we can perceive the future world civilization. And then here is another passage from the Baha'i writings that unity of family, of tribe, of city, state, and nation have been successively attempted and fully established. World unity is the great toward which a harassed humanity is striving. Nation building has come to an end. The anarchy inherent in a state sovereignty is moving towards a climax. A world growing to maturity must abandon this fetish, recognize the oneness and wholeness of human relationships, and establish once for all the machinery that can best incarnate this fundamental principle of its life. There are several references in this passage about the world civilization, that is establishment of the, acknowledgement and appreciation of the concept of the oneness of mankind, establishment of the unity of human race, and replacement of nation building with a broader machinery or mechanism for the entire human race, not just for one particular nation. Next one, please. This is the continuation of our discussion of features and characteristics of Baha'i civilization. There are references in the Baha'i teachings that a mechanism for global governance for the purpose of management of human affairs must be established based on principles of universal participation, consultation, and consensus building. This is a very profound subject in the Baha'i writings. We really don't have time to discuss it in details. However, there is a passage here from Abdul Baha about international peace and collective security, and or the whole concept of world security and peace through world law. I don't know if we have time to read this, but this is a very interesting passage that was enunciated initially in the writings of Baha'u'llah, and then, of course, interpreted in the writings of Abdul Baha, which discusses the concept of collective security in the 19th century. It says, true civilization will unfurl its banner in the midst heart of the world whenever a certain number of its distinguished and high-minded sovereign the shining examples of devotions and determination, shall for the good and happiness of all mankind arise with firm resolve and clear vision to establish the cause of universal peace. They must make the cause of peace the subject of general consultation and seek by every means in their power to establish a union of the nations of the world. They must conclude a binding treaty and establish a covenant, the provision of which shall be sound, inviolable, and definite. They must proclaim it to all the world, and obtain for it the sanction of all the human race. All the forces of humanity must be mobilized to ensure the stability and permanence of this most great covenant. In this all-embracing pact, the limits and frontiers of each and every nation should be clearly fixed, the principles underlying the relations of governments towards one another definitely laid down, and all international agreements and obligations ascertained. In like manner, the size of the armaments of every government should be strictly limited. For if the preparations for war and the military forces of any nation should be allowed to increase, they will arouse the suspicion of others. The fundamental principles underlying this solemn pact should be so fixed that if any government later violate any one of its provisions, all the governments on earth should arise to reduce it to utter submission. As I said, this passage by itself requires days and hours of consultation and study and research. The suggestion that Abdul Baha is proposing here to have a universal pact, a universal binding covenant, is amazing. And of course, you know, but the first manifestation of this became a reality in the works of President Woodrow Wilson with his concept of the League of Nations. And of course, this wasn't successful. And of course, in the writings of Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi are the reason for unsuccessful result of the League of Nations has been explained, but also that was the beginning or prerequisite for a higher sort of union of the nations with the formation of the United Nations. So this has been a process. This has been a process, definitely, because the entire perspective of Baha'i teachings are based on a process-oriented approach to world civilization. So we believe that through these progresses and setbacks, we are moving towards a better understanding and affirmation of this fundamental necessity of our time. Next, please. These are some other teachings that are basically constitute the foundation of this world civilization. I just go through them, you know, read the item, but we don't have really to discuss all of this, but each one by itself could be a subject of further research and study. Elimination of disparity between rich and poor, a democratic system free from vested interests, vote buying, manipulation, neither populism nor elitism. Respect for the rule of law and just government, and antipathy toward anarchy and the mob rule. Global political economy, that is a juxtaposition of political reform, economic justice, and universal ethics. non-involvement of clergy in political affairs, ascendancy of reason, wisdom, mind, and intellect, education for all, elimination of racial, national, ethnic, and religious prejudices. Next one, please. We continue the same discussion. The pattern of social progress, this is one of the features of this world civilization, has been punctuated by incessant interactions between the two processes of disintegration and integration. We have already explained that. In our interconnected world, this is another observation and significance of this global pact that we discussed. Every crisis in any corner of the world, once released, will soon emerge out of its domestic walls. By domestic wall, I mean a community, a nation, a city, and find a global character. This is one of the requirements of our time. And recognizing that and acknowledging this fact that no problem can remain within the boundaries of a local or regional or national border is the first step towards understanding the need for this global pact or global covenant. So when this problem comes out of its domestic walls, it finds a global character and gives rise to a pattern of international deterioration. The coronavirus is one example which we are now still experiencing. The inevitable consequence of this crisis reveals the need for international cooperation and the development of crisis management agencies that share a common sense of responsibility to the global neighborhood. Next item is that, based on all we discussed, world civilization is not just a vision or an emerging reality, but also a conceptual framework. This is so important to remember, to pay attention to this part. It's a conceptual framework beyond and above any geographical borders or the politics of the nation state. It involves normative claims, that is, value-oriented claims, such as justice and liberty, as well as empirical claims that can be measured and evaluated. You know, look at the problems of the world, observe them, measure them, and evaluate them. Do they lead us towards accepting or working for this universal framework? It provides the most plausible method to perceive and evaluate world events. Here we can even suggest that having world civilization as a unit of a study, it provides us also with a method to evaluate world events. Because we all, in the past, in history, we have had other criteria upon which we evaluated and perceived world events. As I said, for instance, nation state was one. And other factors, religions, different religious differences between religions. But when we remove all this and we have this global concept of civilization, this becomes like the embracing methodology for a study, for research and analysis. Next one, please. All right, these are two additional elements. First, we have to remember that Baha'i concept of world civilization rests squarely on the rhythm of continuity and change, stability and progress. See, they seem two separate or conflicting concepts. You have either stability and progress, or you have continuity or change. And oftentimes in the past, when you insisted on continuity, you ignored the change. When you insisted on stability, you forgot about the progress, and vice versa. You emphasize so much on progress that you forgot or ignored the element of stability. So this can be applied to any social and political and economic and cultural issues of our time. So the eternal truths of the past need not be discarded, but reconciled with the steady and ever advancing movement of civilization. So we need this progressive evolutionary approach that uses the past, uses the stability in order to work for the progress and establish a dialectical relationship between novelty and change. I believe this is the last part, the last section of our presentation. It is from the Baha'i writings. The question raised in your letter, someone has written letters, go to the heart of the issues facing Baha'is everywhere at this critical point in world history. We are witnessing the disintegration of the great civilizations which has for over 2 centuries dominated world history and shaped the behavior and attitudes of the most influential sectors of modern society. The defining characteristics of this civilization has been a materialistic view of reality, the conviction that both human consciousness and human society are essentially the products of material forces, and that it is to these forces that we must look for the resolution of the great problems facing our world. To me, this is a very important statement that basically goes to the core of the discussion that we had. We said that the core of civilization is about belief system, is about values and meanings. And the purpose of the Baha'i faith is to change the core and infuse it with a new spiritual and moral core. Next. Time for questions.
Great, I'll stop sharing. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabet. That was really interesting and insightful talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone else did. Yeah, so everyone, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll read it out loud. Okay, so our first question is from Shahrzad. Would the separation of church and state mean that the Baha'i institutions, like the local and universal houses of justice, remain as internal institutions of the faith and not for ruling over general society?
This is a question that needs to be resolved only in the future. I don't have any specific answer for that. Definitely certain principles will be we need to mention, to remember, and that is separation of church and state is one of the fundamentals of the Baha'i faith. And of course, in the Baha'i faith, we don't have a clergy, and therefore the role of clergy in political activities are automatically removed. We also believe in consultative processes and universal participation of all peoples of the world, whether Baha'i or not, in decision-making, in forming their government, in forming their institutions. Therefore, that's another significant factors that will come into the scene, into the decision-making in the future. And also, when Shawqi Effendi wrote about the world order of Baha'u'llah or the features of unfoldment of divine civilization, he also mentioned this fact that This is as much as we can imagine about the future. So we have to acknowledge our limitations at this point. This is for sure. As I said, these are some fundamental principles, oneness of humankind. So oneness of humankind does not separate between Baha'is and non-Baha'is. That respect for human rights, whether you are Baha'i or not, any society must respect human rights. So any form of government in the future will have to consider these universal principles of oneness of mankind, of respect for human rights, of respect for individual participation in the affairs of their society, in the management of the society, harmony of science and religion. So science has to contribute. This is another teaching of the faiths. Science has to tell us how to deal with challenges of nature, of the environment, and all that. So these are not issues of religion or faith. So when we consider all these factors together, it becomes very difficult to answer that question. Definitely, Baha'i institutions will contribute to the betterment of their environment. But to say that to the extent that they merge with secular institutions, that is too premature, at least for me, to speculate about that.
And Sandra asks, how would we define community in this scenario, both Baha'i and non-Baha'i?
Community is, again, from a Baha'i perspective, we don't separate Baha'i community from other communities. Again, the fundamental principle is oneness of humankind, and that association with peoples of the world, from all religious backgrounds, social backgrounds. I was talking to a friend that is coming from a religious background last night, and he was saying that you are really, even though he's not a Baha'i, he said you are really, your community, he says, he was referring to the community, the ones that need to take care of this mess in the world, because you are truly dedicated to unity of people and oneness of people. Because he said in our church, or at least in the version of our church that he belongs to, if a girl, even in 21st century, marries or try to marry a man from another religion, or a man with a girl from another religion, they will be almost shunned by the community. So with this fact, but when you look at the Baha'i community, you see that one of the earliest examples of interracial marriage took place within two Baha'is. So we have always advanced unity, oneness, and therefore we define community in terms of oneness of human race.
Vincent asks, what is the area that will change first, the political area or the business arena from a Baha'i perspective?
I think these changes will be simultaneous. They impact each other, they influence each other. For instance, we are at this level of globalization. We see the major impact of free trade, helping bring people together, free trade, or technology. The fact that we are now talking and using this medium to communicate with each other is the best example of how technology can bring people together. So technology and finance or trade are the two engines of globalization so far. But it is going more than that. We see the signs. When the European Union, for instance, was established in 1990s, was really a great sign that societies and different communities are even going beyond the economic and technological factor, and they try to establish a a European Union based on the even the concept of political unity and United Nations of Europe came to picture. Now, European Union is facing some challenges and issues at this point, which is normal, which is a part of this process. You remember we said setbacks and progress, they work together. Setbacks allow the Union to sit down and examine and evaluate its shortcomings in order to plan for future, for a higher degree of unity. So yeah, it is, they are working together. We need a combination of material and behavioral, as well as moral and spiritual forces working together in order to bring about this world civilization.
Thank you. Some people have mentioned your sound is a little crackling. I don't know if it's something you could fix, but
okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to pause for any other questions. So Sandra asks, where are we in this process? I guess she means the process of building towards a world civilization.
I think we have made great progress, obviously, in every aspect of life, in every aspect of social progress, in this country and worldwide. For instance, in the 20th century, even though from the process of disintegration, we witnessed 2 horrible wars, but at the same time, we witnessed the emergence of the League of Nations and the United Nations, as well as hundreds or even thousands of international agreements and treaties coming together as pieces and components of this international union. So simultaneously, both forces working for the progress of human society and world civilization. And in the 21st century, of course, there was this notion. For instance, I'm giving some random examples because it's so broad. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, and and the entire communist system showed that despite all the claims that they made more than 70 years, it was just a mirage. It was just nothing. It was just a promise not fulfilled, and it just resulted in millions of people all over the world being sacrificed for an image that was created behind the Iron Curtain. And when it collapsed, obviously people saw there was nothing behind the Iron Curtain, nothing but vanity and desire for the same things that they were criticizing for capitalists, or blaming capitalists for, such as authorities, good life, and class system, and so on. So that was a major progress, obviously. And but the point was, perhaps I'm not politicians, perhaps the Western countries did not take advantage of the situation that was created after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there was this push, perhaps, to replace it again with one-sided agenda, that okay, now we have the answer, we have all the answer. And even people wrote books that it's the end of history because liberalism is now really the king. It's just moving everything and it's the end of history. It's the ultimate philosophy of history. But suddenly, after the 2001, the world completely changed. Terrorist attack and with so many other factors. Now that we suddenly realize that we are going to witness a series of setbacks. And but the unfortunate thing is, or the wrong perception is that people who are witnessing setbacks after the, in the 21st century, in other words, some people call that in New World Order, New World Disorder, and so many other concepts. But the fact is, these setbacks, as I mentioned repeatedly in this presentation, are a part of the progress. It's a dialectic of fragmentation and integration, and they work together. And without that, progress cannot be possible. So therefore, the problems that we are seeing with the beginning of the 21st century are the results of this dialectical tension between integration and disintegration. So that is one factor. But we have had in the 20th century great scientific progress. In the world, in physics, with the works of Einstein and the proponents of the quantum mechanics, human conception of reality fundamentally changed. And don't think that was just something that physicists were talking about. Those changes are reverberating all over the world in tangible and not so tangible ways, and affecting our lives. When the nature of reality is changed, and those mechanistic, atomistic, mechanistic perception of reality change with a living concept of change, with the incessant tension between order and disorder, between observation of reality in one way, with the concept that the observer with his mind can influence the behavior of atomic particles. These are really profound changes. Profound changes took place in medicine. Profound changes took place in technology. Imagine, just 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we could imagine, we could dream about talking face to face over the phone or any kind of technological device. So you have to acknowledge these progresses. In terms of human progress, human relationship, we have made progress in terms of equality between men and women, respect for children, education of children has become central to human affairs. We have had progress in several aspects of life, in elimination of prejudice, in racial equality. We have made great progress. I think the United States made great progress, even though there was a challenge, obviously, racial issue in the United States, but through the sacrificial efforts of both white and black, the American society has made great strides towards progress, and of course this will continue. So in all of these 20th century, we can see that progress has been made. At the same time, obviously, as I mentioned, we had two wars, World War I and World War II. We had other regional wars like Vietnam War, Korean War, and Cold War, and that was an issue. The issue of atomic potential war with the use of atomic weapons is still a major issue, obviously, and we need to address that. Sometimes we ignore as if those bombs are just resting there. But so we have to pay attention to that factor, and In terms of family life, of course, or social and individual behavior, obviously there have been progress in some ways, but Baha'i writings also point to the importance of the family life as the foundation of the human society, and we need to preserve this foundation because human society depends on the foundation of family life. So anything that really disturbs the foundation of family life is not accepted in the Baha'i teachings. And I think as we are moving towards in the coming years, with all the changes and upheavals and all that, we are learning more and more about the necessity and sacredness of the family life. So these are just some examples that I'm mentioning here and there, but I hope I was able to convey the idea that both progress and setbacks have, occurred in the past, let's say, 200 years, and we have enough normative and examples, observational examples, that point towards the need for unity of human race, the need for the acknowledgement of the oneness of humankind, and the need for a more universal mechanism for the management of human affairs. And also we need a revitalization of those core moral and spiritual principles that have been the backbone, the foundation of every civilization throughout history.
Thank you. Our next question is from Rambod. How will the rights of women be safeguarded and promoted in this civilization?
This is one of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, of course. When Abdul Baha came to the West, he, in every public discussion and lecture and discourse, he mentioned this fundamental principle of unity, equality of men and women. And there are numerous passages in the writings that in the future, women become more involved in social and political life of humanity. And if that happens, that would be the beginning of the introduction of feminine attributes to the body politic. And that is a very peaceful and a very promising outlook for the future. And we can see that in every domain of life, when women did not have any participation in the past, now they are actively participating in from university, in fields of study that belong to men only. Now women are becoming more active in those fields, in government, in every aspect of society. Things are changing. And in fact, in many countries now, the number of women participating in undergraduate and graduate education are more than men. And so there are many interesting signs that clearly demonstrate that the future will be really a future that will be a balance between feminine and masculine attributes, will be balanced, will be synthesized, and a unique perspective that we have not yet experienced will result as a result of this intercourse.
Thank you. Our next question is from Vincent. Do you think that we will see changes to capitalism in the years to come compared to the current state of capitalism today, either from a Western or Eastern point of view?
Yes, definitely. I said it's a very, very interesting question, and of course it's a very broad topic. My thinking is this, my understanding is this, that the crisis of capitalism is essentially a crisis of ethics and trust and greed. It's not that the elements of exchange, which is the foundation of any economic entity, and there is anything wrong with that. I mean, exchange system will remain in future economic systems, but what exchange system at any level requires a moral foundation. You know, Adam Smith, the founder of capitalism, the father of capitalism in a sense, he wrote on principles of capitalism, and he advanced capitalistic ideas, but he wrote more about morality and ethics than principles of economics. So, and the whole concept of political economy came into being. I mean, resulted when there is a triangle between exchange system, just political system, and ethical foundation. These three must work together for having a successful, effective, just economic system. So therefore, I mentioned that the core foundation of this civilization that Baha'is are preaching is a new spiritual civilization based on cooperation, based on transcendental values, that the material possession is not really the ultimate purpose of life, that we are created to carry forward an ever advancing civilization, that we are created to help each other. And when these fundamental principles will be implemented at the global level, I think to a large extent the problems of capitalism will be resolved. Because after all, capitalism is the way, I mean, in its essential, let's say, if there is such a thing as pure sense, capitalism is the economy. We don't have, I mean, capitalism in a sense that we, human beings should be able to use the product of their labor. They be able to have private, possession or of the result of their labor. So those fundamentals are essential because, when people in different systems, then try to eliminate the role of private economy or private ownership, basically, the result was disastrous because the motivation was removed from the economic system. So we need to maintain the motivation. And also, Abdul Baha is very specific. He says when systems try to equalize, I mean, all people same money, earn same income or same material condition, he says that system would not work. It would collapse. And then he says, he refers to one fundamental point, which comes out of that moral and spiritual renewal. He says philanthropic deeds. He says people should contribute to the poor, not by force, but by own deeds, by the awakening of their conscience. Look at his communication with Andrew Carnegie. We can clearly see the Abdul Baha's perspective on the role of on the function of capitalism. So definitely capitalism will change, both in terms of values, normative principles, also in terms of certain principles that, let's say, respect for for the dignity of people, that all human beings have been created to have basic necessities of life, such as education, health, shelter. That is also acknowledged in the Baha'i teachings. And also work will be viewed as a worship, because it's not just entitlement. It must be a combination of contribution of the whole to the individual, and the individual pays its dues to the whole. So it's just a mutual relationship that both must work together, these two. So individual responsibility is a part of this system, and as a result of that, work is considered as worship. So yeah, definitely will change, but with all these briefly mentioned and really insufficient way that I explained, the capitalist system will change.
Thank you. So the next question I'll read will be the last, just in the interest of time. Alex asks, does community possess a spirit of its own with will and conscious intention beyond what the individual has? If so, what are the differences and similarities between that of the individual and the community will and intention?
It's a very, very, very interesting question. I guess whatever I say, I should say it's not really Baha'i perspective. I don't have at this point any reference from the Baha'i writings to answer that question. I just reflect my understanding of this, which is Baha'i inspired. I think, yes, there is, when a community, a group, a collective life is the result of interacting individuals. In the beginning we said, and interacting individuals are not robots or machines. Interacting individuals are people with soul, with a spirit, with consciousness. So when these souls and conscious beings interact with each other, they create something more than each individual. You may call it the spirit of the age or archetype, but definitely there is in any organism also possesses some degree of subjectivity. So I think human society and global civilization also has this collective spirit, collective soul. Now, we have to be very careful not to become superstitious about this or to, speculate too much, but I think there is something in there.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say thank you again to Dr. Sabet. That was a great talk and a great discussion afterwards. I personally learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else did as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for ending this gathering. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, of course. And I want to also wish all the Baha'is a happy Ayyam, which is, like we mentioned last week, a period of joy and charity and fellowship that precedes the period of Baha'i fasting. And so I also wanted to wish everyone a happy fast starting on Monday. And we'll talk more about that next week. Our speaker next week is Ms. Deborah Walters, and her topic will be why and how Baha'is fast. And again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, so please invite your friends and family. And if you'd like to be on the weekly mailing list, please fill out the contact form that we'll put again in the chat. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.